And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is Shayne, Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. The Pittsburgh Steelers are in the playoffs. Shayne, it took a series of events right in Week 18 in order for this to happen, but they got the win that they needed from the Tennessee Titans to upset the Jacksonville Jaguars. And we are in. And so I was watching that Sunday night game against the Bills and Dolphins, kind of just like torn between how to root for that. Like I didn't know if it's best to go in Arrowhead and play against the Chiefs or to go on the road in Buffalo. Looks like it's going to be a frigid game in Kansas City this week. And so poor Dolphins losing that game. I mean, they've got their work cut out for them now. They're not used to that kind of weather. But anyway, we're going to talk about the Steelers versus Bills wild card matchup. We'd love for you guys to share your thoughts if you're joining us here live. Can the Pittsburgh Steelers win with TJ Watt? That's the big topic today. It's the big topic of this week. It's what we all want to see. I've got some really just condemning evidence against the Steelers right now. And we'll put that in context and talk about what it means. But it's not encouraging. And so far, this team without TJ Watt has been miserable, to say the least. And so we'll go over that in just a little bit here. Let's talk about some of the news for this week, though, Shayne, starting off here. And let's rehash this Steelers win real quick because it was necessary. They needed this to get in the playoffs. I wasn't surprised by it, considering that we knew that the Ravens were going to be resting their players, essentially. No Lamar Jackson. They were without their number 1 and 2 receiver. They were without a handful of guys on defense, Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Hamilton, among others, Roquan Smith. So I wasn't shocked to see the outcome of this game. The Steelers ended up winning by just a score, and I would like it to be a little bit more convincing than that, considering the circumstances, knowing this is a do-or-die game for the Steelers. But I think the weather also played a huge factor in this one.
Yeah, I think the weather was the great equalizer here, right? Because obviously you deal with tough conditions, and the Steelers are kind of built for that right now, especially with the way the run game is going. But the running backs still need to hold on to the ball, and ours didn't do a great job at times. Theirs certainly didn't either. So I think it was the weather that was definitely a limiting factor there. I think the passing games were pretty rough outside of the one big play Rudolph had. He was efficient, but he didn't do anything spectacular. It was kind of hard too. But yeah, overall, I think that they took care of business, right? They got it done. Would have liked it to be cleaner, but again, in this type of weather, this type of time of year, you go to Baltimore if it was in Hines or Acrisure, whatever you want to call it at this point, but whatever game it would have been, or whatever it would have been, it was going to be a rough weather game. So,
yeah, and I was a little bit nervous when that game started because I kind of thought the Steelers would not coast to victory. They have a hard time doing that. They did against Cincinnati a couple of weeks back, but win convincingly enough. And when I saw that just torrential rain coming down there, I'm like, I'm a little bit nervous about the way this could go here. And you saw on the very first drive, both Najee and Warren coughed it up temporarily and were able to regain the football. That game could have gone a different direction had the Steelers gone down early. Besides the point, they emerged victorious. Any other notes that you want to highlight from that game? Winners, losers, anything like that, Shayne?
I would classify him as a winner because of the obvious 0 on the stat sheet, almost minus 1 jet sweep. But George Pickens, he didn't get targeted, but there's a reason for that. They were purposely trying to keep the football away from him after his explosive 2 weeks with Mason Rudolph. But no blips, no concerns, no yelling or making a mess or a fuss. Like, I think he's bought in. And I talked about this actually on a podcast earlier this week that I do as well, that I jump on, about how I think the problem with Pickens was not just his production being low for a while there and being struggling with that and dealing with that, but this is a guy who has not lost a lot of games in his life, right? I mean, he was obviously a great high school player, goes to Georgia. They don't really lose any games at Georgia hardly. Comes in the NFL last year, obviously had a rough start through the year, but they finished really strong. So he is so used to just, success and winning and having that mentality and that vibe around the team. And when we were having those struggles, especially the 3-game losing streak, I think he's not ready for that type of stuff yet. And obviously that's something you want him to work on. I think he has to a certain degree, obviously. But I think winning, as always, tends to kind of cure all, right? Like that's really the biggest thing with that.
Yeah, and I had people ask me, Shayne, like, how could you be celebrating? The guy's just doing what he's supposed to do as a good teammate. I'm like, baby steps here, baby steps.
Like, we'll take it.
We have seen, we have seen some not so desirable attitudes and behaviors from Pickens at times.
Yeah.
And so I did think it was encouraging at the very least to say, all right, his body language is great. He was obviously very positive. Rudolph praised him for the way he handled
For sure.
not getting a single target. And again, Pickens knows, and we all know at home, he's too good to not get a target throughout the course of an entire game. And so that can't happen again. We talked about that on yesterday's show. If you guys want to catch up on that, Shayne and I broke down a lot of that, but it can't happen again if you expect to win against Buffalo.
No.
Honestly, the biggest loser from this game obviously was Montravius Adams colliding into TJ Watt late in that third quarter.
He's going to be thinking about that
and I know that, I mean, he probably got some threats or something after that. I feel bad for the guy because obviously it was completely unintentional.
It's not his fault. He's just trying to throw the ball. And
no, I know. We just, it's hard. It's a hard scenario now. You go into the biggest game of the season, the biggest game the Steelers have had in 2 years, and you're doing it without your best player. So we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. All right. Steelers made the playoffs, obviously, because of the Titans win over Jacksonville. Did you see that game going that direction, Shayne? I can't remember when we made our predictions the week prior. What did you say?
I did predict this game to go this way. And this was the game I was looking at, not so much the Bills-Dolphins, as much as I think the Dolphins are kind of getting a little too much flack right now for that loss. I just felt like the Bills kind of have their number. They're built to play them very well. Josh Allen, despite the wild turnovers early in the game, has always really dominated the Dolphins since he's been in the league. So I wasn't as confident about that happening. So this was the one that I was looking at where, okay, I think the Titans in a game where they want to send the Jaguars home. They have always owned the Jaguars. Derrick Henry especially has always owned the Jaguars. Mm-hmm. I mean, just think of the 99-yard touchdown run years ago and just all the big plays he's had against them. And I was like, this could be his last hurrah. And it turns out it was also Mike Vrabel's for some reasons unknown. I'm sure that'll be talked about. But I just felt like the Jaguars this wasn't their year. They had a lot of things go wrong. They had the 8-3, start through 11 games and kind of crash down the stretch there. And Trevor Lawrence was injured, and it just felt right. And I ended up being right about that. And I'm definitely glad to say it.
Yeah, I didn't think I thought that Jacksonville would pull it out because I knew that Lawrence was going to be right. I had a good hunch that Lawrence was going to be playing in this game, and I thought that it meant more to them, obviously, because they were winning, you're in, and so and it didn't mean much to Tennessee other than the fact that you want to beat a division rival. But Jacksonville just got cold. Without that game, the Steelers do not get in with the way that the results in the Bills-Dolphins game went, and so Steelers needed Tennessee. Tennessee showed up. Mike Vrabel, former Pittsburgh Steeler. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he pulled through for us in the end there. Let's talk about the Mike Tomlin rumors for a second. We're just going to touch on this because we did this in yesterday's show.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
And so if you missed that, make sure you go back and give that a listen. There are whispers again now, and this one's coming from Adam Schefter now, that Mike Tomlin could consider taking some time off, was the words that he used, following the 2024 postseason. And so that would be really interesting. This is not the first time that we've heard something about Tomlin. There's been nothing concrete, but we've heard it now from Schefter and Jay Glazer, who has connections with Tomlin, and I believe Rappaport as well. And so there might be something more to this than what we originally thought.
Yeah, and I think that the more we hear about it, the more likely it is that it's at least something that has actively been talked about, whether it's just with him in his inner circle or the team understands that this is a possibility, whatever the sources are and whatever way they're leaning, like there's definitely something to this, right? Now, is it one of those things where it's like he's thinking about it because he's been coaching so long and maybe just kind of offhandedly talking about it with people that would be willing to tell other people about it? We don't know how deep this actually goes, but I do think obviously where there's smoke, there's fire typically. And I think when it comes to Tomlin, he has had such a long tenure now with this team. The second longest, with the team, obviously, Nolan and Cowher have finished at 15 years. Like, this is a long time to coach one team. And even we've talked about, is there a staleness to it for even him at this point? Is there an element of, does he feel like maybe he's kind of reached the ceiling of what he can do as a coach with this particular team? Or maybe just coaching in general. Maybe he feels he needs to take some time to kind of refresh himself. And we saw this with Sean Payton. We saw this with, in a different situation, but Mike McCarthy, when he loses his job, he took a year off when he probably could have worked, ends up with the Cowboys. And they have their own question marks to still figure out in the postseason, but that's worked out well for him overall. So there's definitely precedent for this. And I think if he does this, it's going to be curious, at least for me, to see, is this something where he takes a year, 2 years off, and then they retain his rights? He gets traded like a Payton situation. There's a lot of things that could happen with this.
Yeah, it does. And I compared that to Sean Payton
Yeah,
on yesterday's show
would
when
be very
Sean Payton
similar. Yeah.
coached the Saints for 15 years and was very, very successful before deciding like he needed a break. He took
Yeah,
that
take
year
a
off.
break off.
They
Yeah.
traded him for first, second, third round pick. And so I don't know if that's going to be the case with the Steelers. I wouldn't bet on it. I think the obvious bet is that Tomlin returns. And because the Steelers aren't going to move on from him, it's going to be his
Yeah,
choice,
it would be
essentially. I
him
mean,
deciding that. Yeah.
and so it's something to track for sure. And we'll be sure to talk about that this offseason as more developments or rumors come in here. So let's talk about the Steelers depth chart for a minute, Shayne. This is a curious topic, and
Yeah.
it's not surprising that this is one that's on the agenda today. Mike Tomlin had his press conference. He was asked about this, and he's actually kind of upset about the question, honestly. And so I didn't really give a definitive answer, but the Steelers depth chart came out, the updated depth chart ahead of wildcard weekend. And Kenny Pickett still listed as the quarterback one for the Steelers, followed by Mason Rudolph, even though we know that Mason Rudolph is going to be the starting quarterback for this game. Is it an issue, Shayne? Is it a part of just trying to save Pickett's confidence? Like, is that what's going on at this point? Because we know that Rudolph is starting.
Honestly, I have no clue. And I think this is a very funny thing because, like, obviously you have to ask the question because it's an updated depth chart and it's a weird thing. And, like, maybe it's just because he didn't lose his job from injury. They're just going with the hot hand who happens to be the backup quarterback officially over Trubisky. Maybe that's the reasoning behind it. Maybe it was the way it was worded when they decided to put the depth chart out. I don't know what the reasoning is. I do think it's funny, and I understand why Tomlin is upset about it a little bit because it's not like he sits there and updates the depth chart himself. It's not like he does. Like, he's not the one that's like actually putting it into the computer and doing everything and creating the graphic. Like, I think obviously we know who's starting, right? There's no question of who is starting.
Yeah.
He's announced it. It'd be one thing if he didn't announce it, but then it was like, why would you ask me about that? It's like, because you put him as the number one quarterback. Like, because we know, it is just a weird thing. I don't know if there's any specific reasoning behind it, like we kind of talked about, but I understand the question. It's just, I don't think it means anything ultimately.
Is this kind of like an Eagles situation? I'm trying to remember back with the Doug Peterson with Nick Foles took over. Was Wentz healthy at that point? And then just is a kind of situation like that? I'm trying to think if he was healthy.
I know the Super Bowl year he tore his ACL, so he was done. So he had no chance coming back. I think the year after that might have also still happened at one point. I don't remember.
I might be getting my years mixed up.
Yeah, but like one of those, I think something similar is like this has definitely happened to somebody before. I just don't know if it was important enough at the time for anybody to ask about it, probably. But going into a playoff game when your quarterback that's drafted in the first round is healthy enough to play, and he's then listed as number one in the depth chart, again, is it just as simple because he would be the number one and had he not gotten hurt? Is it as simple as that? Like, that would make sense, but it's still kind of confusing. I don't know. It seems kind of innocuous, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting to say the least. And obviously the Steelers are moving forward with Rudolph. We hope he has that Nick Foles type of run because they're going to need it.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
All right, let's move on here. The Steel Curtain podcast is running a deposit match promotion up to $100 for any new Sleeper Daily Fantasy user. Make sure you use the code FANSIDED2 when signing up to receive your deposit match. Please remember to always game responsibly. Scan the QR code on the screen to see if you qualify. All right, Shayne, let's talk about the TJ Watt injury. When it first happened, I'm just relieved that it wasn't an ACL, because if you get an ACL in January, that takes you out all summer long. You are rehabbing. I've seen it happen to players late in the season, and it affects them the following year. And so something like that, they avoided some catastrophe there. However, it's still not a good situation, because not only did you make the playoffs and you bump back like at least 5 spots in the pecking order, like in draft capital, which again, it's all about making the tournament anyway. I understand that. But now you are going into the biggest game that you've played in 2 years without your best football player. Watt, if you have not heard yet, has officially been ruled out of this game by Mike Tomlin. I know there were some who were optimistic, like he's a Watt, he can bounce back from this. He wanted to go back in that game. He said that he wanted to go back in the game. He's just not there. And we couldn't expect him to be. It was a grade 2 MCL sprain, which he avoided the grade 3, which was a tear, which that was the initial fear reported by Ian Rappaport. Came back later and said it's a grade 2. And in the way that Rappaport described it is that Watt will be out At best case scenario, he's out 2 weeks, which means he would be out this week. If the Steelers beat the Bills, he'd be out against the Ravens, who the Steelers they're already locked into playing next week if they win, because one seed plays the 7 seed. So Watt would have to, Steelers would have to make it past 2 rounds on the road against really good teams and get to the AFC Championship game against whoever that team ends up being. And then Rappaport said Watt could probably come back and play with a knee brace.
Mm-hmm.
So that outlook right there is not very encouraging at all. What do you make of that?
No, and I guess ultimately the people who thought, he's a Watt, he could do it. It's like I don't care how good your genes are, and clearly they have about as good as it gets as far as NFL circles go. But if your MCL doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it's not healthy, it's not healthy. So, and especially when it comes to like joints and stuff like that, it'd be one thing if it's just a pain threshold thing. If it's a pain threshold thing, he'd be practicing today, right? Like there'd be no question about that. But this is an injury you can't mess with, because that is how you end up missing time next year, because you tear something and mess something up. So totally makes sense why he's ruled out. I don't think we'll see him in the postseason again, unless it's the championship game. I could see a scenario where if he tells him, like, listen, I really think I can go next week, with a brace on, then I could maybe see him at least suiting up, maybe not playing consistently unless it gets close or something, or the game stays close. But best case scenario, like you said, is really probably the AFC title game. And if we make the AFC title game without him, then honestly, great.
Going well.
Yeah, awesome. Then maybe it won't be that big of a deal anyway. Maybe Herbig has 4 sacks in 2 games and he's being a freak, and we'll talk about how they're going to replace him possibly. Mm-hmm. But no, I think that this is obviously the biggest news for the Steelers in the playoffs. Is him not being there really puts a damper on what could have been, I think, a more interesting matchup than it might end up being otherwise.
Yeah, and I can't help but think when that was happening, I'm like, why couldn't it be somebody else that gets their knee rolled up on late in the game like that? I don't wish injury upon anybody, obviously, but that is just that's the single most important chip of this team, I feel like. And so I want to talk about Pittsburgh's injury, or excuse me, their history here without TJ Watt.
Yeah.
So we've got an 11 game sample size without Watt. That's coming up on a full season. It's not quite there, but I updated these numbers just recently, Shayne, and I posted them out here. This stuff is kind of scary. What we've seen so far, and I hope that it was just a fluky thing. This 11 game fluky sample size, that the trend breaks now at like today for this, because here are the numbers with and without Watt. When Watt has played since 2017, the Steelers are 69-33-2. They win 67.3% of their games. Without Watt, they are 1-10. They win 9% of their games. With Watt, the Steelers allow 19.8 points per game to their opponent. Without Watt, they allow 26.3 points per game to their opponent. With Watt, the Steelers sack the quarterback 3.31 times per game. Without Watt, they sack the quarterback 1.45 times per game, which is the difference of more than double. With Watt, the Steelers have a combined interception, forced fumble recovery of 2.2 or 2.55 of those type of plays per game. They have 1.27 interceptions, forced fumbles, and fumble recoveries combined per game when Watt doesn't play. This is pretty convincing stuff here, because this is not a small sample we're talking about. It's not a 3 to 5 game sample size. This is 11 games without Watt, and that's really bad stuff. I mean, they are a bottom tier defense legitimately when Watt doesn't play in terms of all those metrics. And now I want to break it down even a little bit further, Shayne, because everybody will say context. Where's the context here? And I want to talk about the context for a second, and then I'll let you chime in and share your thoughts. So I broke it down further, and this is every game, every opponent, and every quarterback that the Steelers have faced without TJ Watt in these 11 games. And so dating all the way back, we've got the Bears. The Steelers lost to the Bears. They allowed 23 points to Mike Glennon's Chicago Bears in that loss. Then they lost to Baker Mayfield and the Browns. They allowed 24 points. They lost to Joe Burrow and the Bengals. That's understandable.
Right.
Allowed 24 points, but they did not sack the quarterback, something Steelers routinely do against the Bengals.
Right.
They played the Chargers, and they lost to Justin Herbert again, a good quarterback, and he was playing really well at that time. They allowed 41 points to Herbert without TJ Watt.
Remember that one? Yeah.
They played the Patriots. They lost to Mac Jones, and the Patriots allowing 17 points and not sacking him once. Then they played Jacoby Brissett. I think that was the following week. They played Jacoby Brissett. They allowed 29 points to Jacoby Brissett and the Cleveland Browns. The Steelers sacked the quarterback twice in that game. They played the New York Jets, and Zach Wilson allowed 24 points to Zach Wilson without TJ Watt. Then you play Josh Allen, allowed 38 points without Watt. Understandable. Although if you go back the last time the Steelers played with Watt, they allowed 16. Watt had a 3-sack game.
Right, yeah.
So here's the lone win, Shayne. It comes against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tom Brady. Of all people, it comes against Tom Brady, 45-year-old Brady, but Tom Brady nonetheless. That was the remarkable Trubisky second.
Yeah, weird one time he plays good off the bench game. Yeah,
the one time he played good for the Steelers that earned him that contract extension. Yeah, so that's Steelers 1 win without Watt. Following week, they lost to Tua and the Dolphins. They sacked the quarterback 0 times. Then after that, they gave up 35 points to Jalen Hurts, and the Eagles sacked the quarterback 0 times. This defense has been horrific when Watt hasn't played. And it's a mixture. It's not just because, they've only played good quarterbacks without Watt. No, that's not true. More than half the quarterbacks they played have been kind of just unstartable quarterbacks, really. And so what is your take on all this? Are we reading too deeply into these things? Are the Steelers really that bad when Watt doesn't play?
So I just want to point out, something that's been talked about a lot recently, and I'm not going to do this debate anymore. I don't really feel like fighting with people about it. I know that Garrett's going to win Defensive Player of the Year. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it necessarily at all, because he had a great year and he has great impact on that defense. And the defense has outperformed ours, right? Obviously, that's going to factor into this race. But there's a lot of people that say that Watt is a system player. The reason he's so good is because of the system in Pittsburgh. And I just want everyone to look at the numbers when this man does not play for this defense. And it's not like the defenses that he was missing from were like bad defenses outside of him. Like, we still had a lot of the same star talent that surrounds him now, and they could not get after the passer. They could not create splash plays. I think the underrated part of Watt missing is the amount of weird, like, stupid stuff that he pulls off in the middle of a game that no one else even really knows how or tries to do and create splash plays is one of the biggest factors to this defense not giving up a ton of points, despite being in the 20s in yards allowed and not having a great success rate in terms of keeping teams from getting close to the end zone. Like, they do not allow a lot of points because he will create a turnover or two pretty much on his own every week, whether that's through pressuring the quarterback into a bad decision or literally taking the ball from him or intercepting the ball, as we know he will do sometimes. Like, it's that element of it, I think, is really hard to quantify with analytics and statistics even, because when you watch it, it just feels like, okay, there's a play that needs to be made right now, and you almost feel like you know that he's going to make it. And I can't say that about a lot of other star edge rushers or defensive players, because they don't all have the instincts that he has as a football player. And that's what I think is most missing from this team when he doesn't play, is that element of it. Not just the pass rushing ability in general, but that stuff that you can't really coach or try to replicate.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he's such a monster when it comes to that kind of stuff. And we've got enough evidence to support that at this point. And to add some more context to this, I know the other argument people are going to say, well, the drop off was so bad. Like, you've got lower than replacement level players. And that's true. Like,
that is a huge
for half of this, they had Malik Reed was the backup. And we just talked about him yesterday and saying, yeah, he had no business being in that position where he's the first guy off the bench. And so that certainly did not help. No. That was for about half of it, though. But you go back before that, there were multiple games where Melvin Ingram was the backup to TJ Watt, and the results were still really bad. And so it gave up a 41-point game. And in the 2 games where Melvin Ingram had to step in for Watt, the Steelers gave up, I got it right here, 65 points and only sacked the quarterback twice over a 2-game span. And so, and Ingram is a good player, and he's been proven to be a good player. And so, yes, no, obviously the backup's not going to be as good as your starter. There are different types of replacement level backups. Like there's guys that are like bottom floor, like barely rosterable type players. And there's guys that are like, oh, you could be good enough to be on somebody else's starting lineup. And so obviously if the Steelers had one of those guys, maybe the results aren't quite as bad, but I don't know which these games they shift the tides enough to say now the Steelers suddenly win these football games where the defense is otherwise horrible. And so I want to throw one more thing out here, Shayne, and just another testament to TJ Watt is last year, the Steelers in the 8 games that Watt did not play because of the pec tear, Alex Highsmith and Cam Hayward combined for 5.5 sacks.
Yeah.
When Watt was on the field, not what he did, but just when he was on the field, Hayward and Highsmith combined for 19.5 sacks. in the other half of the season. So it's I don't feel like that's coincidental. I know that sure your schedule got maybe a little bit easier down the stretch. Watt makes a difference. He is the guy that every single team has to account for. And obviously we talked about this before. They know what side he's going to be on. So it's easy to account for where he's going to be, but it's still hard to account for the impact that he can make and the impact that he can help others on his team make.
No, you're 100% right. And that's why, like, I do think, and we'll talk about it here in a second, I think that there is a higher chance of us being able to game plan around the fact that Watt isn't going to be in there. I think we have better players to slot in to do some of the stuff that he would normally do. But there's no guarantee, because again, you cannot guarantee that any of these guys are going to come in for him are going to be able to make that game-changing play that's really about instinct or about hustle or about just like things that he does better than really anyone else in his position. You can't ask that of backups or even other even other star edge players. They don't always do some of the stuff that he pulls off, and it's really hard to equate that to anyone else or try to ask anyone else to do those things.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Nick Herbig, but this is not the way that I wanted to see him.
No,
I wanted to see him just get in heavier rotation,
right?
Because that would have kept Watt and Highsmith nice, fresh, and healthy. But let's talk about this, Shayne. How should the Steelers game plan for the Bills this week without Watt, knowing that it's probably going to be some variation of that 3-man rotation, like Highsmith, and then you've got Marcus Golden and Nick Herbig. Those are your guys that have to find a way to get after one of the hardest quarterbacks to bring down in the NFL, one of the best at extending the play in the NFL, if not the best at extending the play in the NFL. And so how are those three guys without TJ Watt, who has played Josh Allen very well in the past, how are they going to get the job done? And what kind of rotation do you see happening here?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit on the show yesterday too. So if you guys want to have some more breakdown of that, you can check that out. But honestly, the best thing that they can do, in my opinion, and this kind of goes back to yesterday, is obviously Highsmith is going to play 99% of the snaps, most likely, on his side. And I think a rotation that's based on down and distance and situation on the other side, where Marcus Golden, the veteran, he's a little bit bigger of a player, more stout. You have him be the primary kind of first and second down, or just non-passing situations or likely running situations. You have him on the field, and Herbig comes in, brings that juice, that fire on third downs or just passing situations, right? Like that's kind of ideally what you do. I have a feeling they're not going to be that specific about it. I do think it's going to be more about, letting Golden probably go out there first and kind of see how he's playing. If he's not getting it done, then Herbig goes in for most of the snaps and like kind of rotate them throughout the game in that way. But I do think the best way to do it would be to have Herbig just focus on, okay, we don't need you to fit the run here necessarily. We don't need you to set a hard edge. We need you to get around that edge as fast as possible and make Josh Allen uncomfortable. And I will say with Herbig, like as much as Watt is great at this too, like there's not many guys that have ever been better at just chasing guys down with pure effort. Herbig has probably just as much, at least like explosiveness as Watt, just because he's a smaller player. He has really good straight line speed. Like Allen can run away from guys at his size, but I think Herbig can chase him down. I think that's one of the benefits of having him in there, especially on the passing downs.
Yeah, and Herbig obviously is a smaller guy. It's why he fell in the draft. Like if
it is.
If he was bigger and longer, I mean, you're looking at potentially a first-round pick. Because
he would have been a first rounder if he was like
that good.
Yeah,
like, and he's already proven to be better than his draft status, and so that I love. Now and I think that even as a run defender, Shayne, I think that Herbig is slippery and elusive enough.
He's explosive, but he just won't set that edge the same way that
his quick twitch can get around blocks. What would scare me though is if they just decide to come downhill and you've got these mammoth offensive tackles and Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown. I worry that he can get washed out a little bit. So I agree with you. I want Herbig this week to be a pure pass rush specialist, just a guy that tees off, bends around the edge as quick as you can, and tries to get to Josh Allen before he has that ability to extend the play and turn something. It's turned it into a huge gain, which we've seen him do. And even like Allen is good enough to the point where you look at this Dolphins game, he throws 2 picks in the red zone. He can still bounce back and make big plays after that. And it never scares him. Like it doesn't matter how many mistakes he makes.
He cares so little about it. It's funny, honestly.
He's not going to stop running through people, and he's not going to stop extending the play. And so I'd like to see Herbig in that role. Again, we broke this down a little bit further on yesterday's show if you want to go check that out. But I agree with you, Shayne. I think that Highsmith is only leaving the field if he is gassed and can't go for a drive or a series, and then he'll be right back out there again because they know how much this game depends on him. And honestly, you could make the case that besides Mason Rudolph, who is the quarterback of this team for this week, Highsmith is the next most important player in this team. Like, they have to get pressure on Josh Allen without TJ Watt. And if they can't do that, they will have no chance in this game. So keep an eye on him. He needs a huge performance this week. All right. If you are a fan of Pittsburgh Steelers football and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right. And if you are joining us here in the live chat, if you have any questions for us as we preview the Steelers-Bills matchup, please drop them in the chat. Shayne and I would love to get to those before the end of today's show. And we are going to talk about that wild card matchup this weekend in Buffalo. Forecast is looking like 26 degrees and snow flurry. So perfect, like AFC playoff football weather there. Steelers versus Bills. Start with the odds here, Shayne. Not encouraging, but the Steelers like to operate as underdogs. And so never more motivation than this. The Steelers are 10-point underdogs as we go into Super Wildcard Weekend. That is the biggest underdog of any team playing football this week. And so the line actually started at 9.5 points. It got bet up to 10 points now. And I'll be interested to see if it comes back down at all before kickoff or if this is where it's going to be. And so is that a fair line where we're sitting at right now?
I think it's very fair. Now, I am curious what this line would have been if Watt's healthy. Like, how much does he move this line? Is it go down to like a true touchdown, like 7-point thing? I could argue that. I think you can make that argument that he at least swings it that much. If you look at the stats, he swings it by a touchdown, right? Like we talked about, like points allowed, like it's basically a full touchdown difference in points per game. So I think that this is totally fair, considering you don't know what this defense is going to look like against Josh Allen with TJ Watt out. Right. I think with him in there, you have at least some level of like, okay, they're probably going to get points scored on them, but there's going to be moments where they make a big play and Allen gives them a chance to take the football away. And now I think that they don't have to worry about that as much, at least going into the game planning wise. I think they're going to try to just take what we give them and just kind of play it from there. And then if Allen wants to make a mistake, awesome. But I think that they're more likely to be able to get away with that now with Watt out.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised to see the line where it is either. I mean, we talked about this before. You're with your third string quarterback, you're with your best football player, and you're on a roster that has some glaring holes and glaring weaknesses on this team with guys like Dan Moore and Mason Cole, your whole linebacker group outside of Landon Roberts returning. You had holes in the secondary at safety next to Minka, and Minka has missed 5 weeks now, 4 or 5 weeks. And so, and then prior to that, he had the hamstring injury. And so Minka's been out half the year. They just have too many roster holes for Vegas to set this line much higher or closer together than what it is. And so over under for this game set at only 36 points. I think that's probably pretty reasonable as well, considering the weather could play a factor in this one too. Let's talk about some of the biggest things to watch in this game, because this is what eyes will be on, because Watt's not there. Obviously, how is the pass rush going to perform? Alex Highsmith is going to be a big topic this week. Can he do enough? And I'll be interested to see, Shayne, because I still don't know what the plan is. I don't think we'll know until we see it. But do you predict that Highsmith will mostly stick to his own side over the right edge going against Deion Dawkins? Do you think the Steelers try to move him, maybe get a different matchup over against Spencer Brown, where he can kind of just dip and spin him on the left side over there? How do you see that going for him?
So honestly, this take is more based on something that clearly didn't matter if you look back and watch it as far as the preseason goes. But in a very limited time against Deion Dawkins in the Bills preseason game, Nick Herbig put him in a blender. To a point where it was disgusting. Like Dawkins was probably like, man, I need to get out of here. Like, this is embarrassing. I'm a Pro Bowl left tackle. What was going on? I would like to see Herbig get that matchup. And as much as Spencer Brown has even definitely more of an issue in pass protection, I think I'd rather have my best pass rusher go against him and let Herbig try to figure it out against Dawkins. Because I think that the size difference, obviously, even though Herbig could get around him maybe quicker, Brown is at least a bigger target to have to get around, and I think that limits some of his upside as far as the quick get to the ball immediately type of stuff. So I'd like to see Dawkins Herbig get Dawkins a lot of the time. So I'm hoping that they move all these guys around. Really, you have to do something to confuse this Bills offensive line. Like, now that TJ's not in there, I already didn't think you should do what they do anyway and leave them both on the same side all the time. But you definitely can't do that now, I don't think. Because now you lose that benefit of Watt just still messing stuff up anyway, despite him always being in the same place. So
Yeah, and I think the Bills they've got like a stable offensive line overall. They don't have that one piece. It's like, oh, this is our guy, like Dan Moore on that side saying, this is the guy that
Yeah,
we
even
have to go
Brown's been
after.
better this year. Yeah, so
So he's been better this year. And so it's the interior guys. I mean, it's the same way, like Benton and Hayward, a lot depends on them. And as good as Benton has played, like we'd like to see those guys obviously step it up. Even without Watt, it's going to take all hands on deck here. So a collection team effort to get that pressure because we know what Allen can do. Otherwise, graded out as the top quarterback in the NFL this year, according to Pro Football Focus. And the Bills finished 7-1. And so you're getting a hot team. It's like, it's the anti, like whoever would have got the Jaguars if they would have snuck into the playoffs. So you don't like to get hot teams when they're performing well. And that's what the Steelers are getting this week. It's why the line is so big. Let's talk about Joey Porter here, because I think that, man, you can make a case that, again, it's Highsmith. And then maybe Porter's right there in terms of importance in this game. Like if you, I'll ask you this actually, Shayne, if you had to be without one of these guys, knowing that TJ Watt is out, would you be without Highsmith or would you be without the only guy that can cover in the Steelers secondary at cornerback?
So that's really funny question.
Against Stephon Diggs.
Right. I think the problem is it wouldn't, if Alex was out, it wouldn't matter if Joey Porter's playing, because there would be all the time in the world. Like, you can't ask Joey to cover for 6 seconds. Now you can ask someone else to cover for 3 seconds or 4 seconds if Highsmith's in there. So like, I think the answer is Highsmith. I've always been one that I believe that pass rush is more consistent and more of a better investment than secondary play, simply because I feel like the down to down consistency is easier to manage on the edge, where you're getting a lot of the same matchups. Like, they don't have the same disadvantages, where, again, playing corner in the NFL especially is just a nightmare. Like, I feel like if you wanted to make me look the worst I possibly could as an athlete, just ask me to go cover somebody in space. Like, it's insane. So I think, honestly, Highsmith would be the one I'd be more worried to be out, because I don't know if Golden and Herbig would be enough. And I already know at least the secondary is going to be bad, like kind of bad no matter what we do. At least with the pass rush, we have a better chance of succeeding there. So.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that now. Now that I'm thinking about that, I still think that Porter's probably, top 5 player on the team in terms of importance this week.
Oh, yeah.
Stephon Diggs is that go-to target. I know that him and Allen have not been on the same page this year. There's kind of that strife between them a little bit.
Other times,
but that is the guy you got to contain. I think that's the guy that Porter's going to follow around the field. And it's a tough matchup because you're going against a precise, quick twitched route runner. And I think that Porter probably fares well, better at least against the bigger, like the T. Higgins type receivers. I'm interested to see how he does in this matchup, because it's going to be necessary for him to at least contain Diggs somewhat for the Steelers to be successful, force Josh Allen to go somewhere else. But that is one thing that I worry about here. I also worry about Dalton Kincaid. Like, that guy, I feel like can shred the Steelers across the middle of the field because of their poor linebacker play and safety play that they've gotten recently. I think that's a guy that's going to have to be accounted for him. Kind of do a little bit of inside out zone coverage here. Whatever you have to do, don't let him get comfortable to his top 2 favorite targets right now. We talked about Gabe Davis coming back. I'm not as worried about Gabe Davis, Khalil Shakir. I think that the rest of the defense will be able to match kind of stride for stride with those guys. But the ones I just don't, I just feel like this particular matchup, it's Diggs busting out on one of those enormous plays down the field, or Dalton Kincaid just kind of nickel and diming with the tight ends down the field as well. That's kind of what scares me this week.
Yeah, and real quick, I did want to get a couple of chats in here. So we have Rose earned playoff time, right? I think the cover 9 out of the 3 safety look could be successful this week. I do think that Rose earned a spot, not in the necessarily starting lineup guarantee, but I think his role as a box safety in particular, I think no one else can really do that as well as him, at least what he's shown in limited time this year. Plus, this could allow Minkah to play true free safety, which, with his injuries and maybe trying to keep him away from the box a little bit in this game, to give us a chance to create plays, like that would be very helpful for sure. And Steelers freak Porter is big this game too. Yeah, we talked about that. Like, he's going to have to lock down Stephon Diggs realistically. And this is interesting. We'll talk more about scouting actually on the second show going into the offseason. But Tommy, have you scouted TJ Tampa yet? I think he's a good fit and a great match with Porter. I'm not sure if you watched anybody yet this year, but I am familiar with this guy.
I have just started the scouting process. So no, I've not got to that yet. I assure you that I will get through several hundred players by the end of it here. And when I get to that point, ask me again and we'll go over that. So, but for now, let's talk about this. You talked about the safety position. Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic because now all of a sudden you were decimated and you get two safeties back at once in Minka and KZ. And so now I'm just interested to see how they decide to go about this. Yeah, Rowe hasn't been terrible. He obviously had the interception. Has taken a couple questionable angles at times. And so that's what it would worry me, like Diggs crossing his face and doing one of those type of plays. So I don't really know how that's going to work. I obviously assume that if Minka is healthy enough to practice and go this week, he's not leaving the field because he can't afford to. And so other than that, I don't know what kind of rotation they'll use. Maybe Rowe will be like the Keanu Neal to the DeMonte Case.
That's what I think would be ideal. That would be what you'd want to do with him. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the running game here for a second, Shane, because obviously, I mean, there's so many factors in this game that need to go Pittsburgh's way. Running the ball is one of them. If you don't run the ball well, I don't see any way the Steelers can emerge victorious. You're not going to win like some sort of shootout matchup, but Mason Rudolph against Josh Allen, I don't believe. And so the running the ball is something the Steelers have been able to do very effectively, even more so than what the Bills did. Now, Bills have had a couple monstrous games like against Dallas where they probably could have won that game throwing like 4 or 5 passes because James Cook was so good and Josh Allen was just steamrolling everybody. So it'll be interesting to see who has the better running performance. I think that it's very necessary for Steelers to have that edge over the Bills this week, and I think that it's possible. Obviously, I hope it's not as wet and slippery as it was last week because that'll negate kind of one of Pittsburgh's strengths there. And you can't afford to have those fumbles or anything this week. And so I think that you can find some success against Buffalo. I don't think that their interior defensive line is incredibly strong or anything that way. They do have some players that are on defense that have outperformed expectations this year. But I expect a reasonable rushing performance by the Steelers. Maybe like 120 rushing yards, 4.5 yards in attempts, something like that. I think that you could carve something out like that. Will it be enough to complement that passing game? That's the question.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a minute too, as far as Mason. But as far as run game goes, I think this is obviously the key, right? We can talk about, can Herbig get pressure and can Golden and him match with what TJ does, at least to some degree, give you 70, 80% of what he gives you. And we talk about this and that. Ultimately, if they can't run the football consistently and enough to continue to hold on to the football and take up time of possession, they don't have a path to win, right? Their path to win is play good enough defense, do not allow explosive plays to get down early so that way you have to throw the football, and control the clock, run with your guys. You have the best running back duo in the NFL, in my opinion, at this point, right? Numbers probably bear that out too, but you have one of the best duos in the league, regardless of if there's someone else you have above them. Mm-hmm. You have to rely on what's working. And as much as Mason's had some big plays happen, it's not like he's throwing 50 bombs down the field every game. Like a lot of these are catch and run opportunities that, yes, we haven't seen. We finally have seen. I'm glad to see it. But you can't expect him to continue to do that every single week. He's gotten at least one, it feels like, every week. And it might not happen this game. So you have to be able to run the football consistently.
Yeah, I think what it goes to show us, Shane, this week, that the element that was missing was Rudolph. Over these past 3 games, he has been able to have that one play or two per game where he just gets that dart in stride on a crossing route, a post route, whatever, over the middle of the field. When Steelers are finally using the middle of the field, it allows your receivers to run after the catch. They took care of the work afterwards. Now, I don't know if you can have that again this game where you're going to be able to bust off that. I know that the Buffalo's cornerbacks are playing better than expected. They've been trio of corners there. So, and it's not even the names that you would expect. It's like everybody thought, well, at this point it'd be like, oh, Tre'Davious White on IR, Kyer Elam, former first-round pick, just
can't get on the field.
Like,
not good.
Can't get on the field. It's other guys, like more or less the no-name guys that have really stepped up and have played very well for them. And they've got 3 corners that are grading out inside the top 12 in the NFL at their position this year. So they've been very consistent, reliable. I do think that Rudolph, whether we like it or not, Rudolph is going to have to probably have a 220 plus yards, maybe a pair of touchdowns through the air. Like I think it's going to require that type of game. I don't think you can hold the Bills down enough defensively, especially without TJ Watt to say that you can get away with kind of like what you did last week, 152 yards and a touchdown. Like that's, you're going to need a big Mason Rudolph performance. I don't know how big that's going to go. I don't know what the ceiling is there. I don't think that you're going to get anything close to probably what you did like in Cincinnati. But I think that you are going to have a solid game. Even if you have a complimentary running game, it's going to require a lot to emerge victorious here.
Well, the one good thing I'll say, and I have to get this in just because it's too funny, is he won't have to throw to Chase Claypool with the game on the line. So that he already has an advantage right there.
Yes.
No, it's just, so I think because in our notes here, it's can Mason Rudolph keep pace? No, he probably can't. Well, if he has to, I think that's kind of game. And this is nothing against Mason. It's just we're talking about two different. I mean, they might as well be playing different sports. And this is nothing against, again, Mason. Him and Josh Allen don't play the same sport, really, at the end of the day. Like, they play different positions. You might as well. And, again, I'd be saying that about a lot of guys. So it's not just like a Mason thing. But, yeah, if he has to keep pace, if he has to go blow for blow with Josh Allen, I don't really think that's going to happen. And it shouldn't be expected to happen, though, either. So this isn't something like, oh, well, you have to be able to do that. No, we're past this whole, like, oh, we have to be able to score 30 points thing. If we do, awesome. I can't ask them to do that, right? Like, I'm not asking them to do that against this Bills team. So, yeah, I think Mason will have his moments. I do think that what he's doing is relatively repeatable. Like, I don't think this is some, like, big, huge fluke thing. Maybe the explosive plays being so common is definitely a little fluky because you just don't see that very often in the NFL. Yeah. But in terms of, like, how he's getting them and what he's doing, I do think that is relatively repeatable, at least the rest of the year especially.
Yeah, and if you didn't catch what Shayne was saying there in regards to Chase Claypool, obviously the end of the Bills-Dolphins game, to his very last pass of the game was an interception into double coverage to a Chase Claypool, kind of rounded off his route there. And so just not that he ever had a shot at the ball, but it just kind of the story of his career the last couple of years there. All right, Shayne, let's talk about the Steelers' keys to victory here. We're going to give one on offense, one on defense, what you have to do. I'll let you go ahead and start, and I'm going to hope that you don't take mine this time, but let's see what happens here.
It might be similar to yours, but I'm very specific with mine. I think, and I really believe this, I think they have to run for 200 yards.
Okay.
I think offensively, if we're talking offensively, I think they have to finish the game with over 200 yards rushing because, one, normally if you run for 200 yards, you probably win because the only reason you've run enough to get to 200 yards is because you're nursing a lead, right? So there's that element of it, like just the kind of the head game of it. But also, I legitimately think offensively, the only way that they're going to keep the Bills off the field often enough and also to have the ball often enough in general and score points is to run for that many yards. I really think it's going to take that level of rushing performance to actually come away with a win, on the offensive side at least.
Yeah, offensively, running the game, obviously, very important, critical to this performance. I think Mason Rudolph is going to need to pull out like 4 to 6 like big time throws.
Yeah, probably
those 15 to 20 yard passes down the field. Maybe one of them escapes for a touchdown, and you need to do that without turning the ball over because you lose the turnover battle in this. That's all she wrote. So he's going to have to pull something out of his hat here. Probably needs just his career performance this week. Defensively, what does Steelers have to do?
I honestly, and this is another thing that again, it's kind of specific, but I think they have to force a minimum 3 turnovers. I legitimately think if the Bills turn the ball over less than 3 times, they will win almost no matter what because we've already seen them do that against teams that have better offenses that can actually take advantage of those more, right? I think you have to win the turnover battle by 3. Now, maybe you turn one over, but you get them 4 times. Like, I don't really care how the numbers work out, but I think it has to be, and this is insane to say in the NFL, that you have to have a +3 margin. But I do think that that's the case. I think that you have to be able to out-turnover or have more turnovers than them by 3 at that point. Something I wanted to mention real quick. Pete Carroll apparently is expected to be out as Seahawks coach. I just saw breaking news, so I just want to throw that out there. But he might remain with the team in some other fashion, kind of like a Bruce Arians thing, I think, probably. But just wanted to throw that. I saw that, so I wanted to throw that out. I got it.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. You set the number like right on the head too. Like if you said the Steelers create 2 takeaways in this game, I'm like, no,
probably not enough.
That's not going to cut it. Probably.
Josh would give that to you for fun. He'll do it to you for free.
Oh yeah, he'll give that to you in the first quarter probably before he. Yeah. So I think that 3 is the magic number. I think that 3 gives you that fighting shot to say, all right, just the Steelers create 3. Maybe they don't turn the ball over at all, and you're right there in the game. Maybe you turn it over once. You still win the takeaway battle. You're +2 in turnovers. I think it's going to take probably that. Outside of that, though, I want to kind of go back to those 2 matchups that scare me again. Kincaid against Steelers linebackers, who is just even as a rookie, he's just a precise route runner, and a guy that I would not be surprised at all if Allen targeted 9 to 11 times in this game and kind of puts the game on ice that way. And Stephon Diggs against Joey Porter Jr., depending, like if Porter can just play like lights out football, like completely shut him down, kind of like he did to Jamar Chase in that first game there. You need to have just a phenomenal Joey Porter game to take away the number 1 option for Josh Allen. I think that gives you a fighting chance because it's going to eliminate a lot of that big playability. And again, I mean, there are so many things we can point to, like containing him, like contain the guy too. So it's hard to pinpoint one. It's truly a collection of things when you play a team that is this far above you at this point in time without your best football player. So that part will be interesting. All right, Shayne, let's give our predictions before we sign off here on today's show. And we're hoping that by this time next week, we get to talk about at least one more playoff game. If not, don't go anywhere because you guys are going to enjoy the offseason with us. We're going to break down draft prospects. We're going to talk about free agency, coaching decisions, all that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to amp it up even more. Like it's getting even more excited than this plateaued season. That's what the word we used yesterday, the kind of the plateaued Steelers over the last 5 or 6 years. So make sure you stay with us. But let's give our predictions. Shayne, Steelers versus Bills, wild card weekend. Who do you have winning this contest? Can you give us a score with it?
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about the scenarios that the Steelers could end up pulling this game out. But I think if you played this game, simulated it 100 times, I think the Bills would win about 90 of them, right? I think that's kind of where we're at right now. And, that's no slight to even what the Steelers have done the last 3 weeks. It's just really hard to play a team that can legitimately turn the ball over a bunch with their quarterback, and it just doesn't matter because he just makes other plays. And that's the problem with it. We talked about the +3 turnover margin being a thing that I think would have to happen. It's just how it is, right? And I think that ultimately they're gonna beat the spread. I don't think they'll lose by 2 scores. I think that the Bills are at a place where they can win games outright the way that they're playing, but I don't think that they're conducive to blowing a team out generally because of the mistakes that will still happen because of that. So I have 27-20 Bills. I think that they're going to win by a touchdown. Maybe the Steelers have to come back late to make it a touchdown game, but I do think that they will at least cover the spread.
All right, Shayne, I agree with where you are there. Yeah. I've got the score a little bit lower here. I've got 24-16 in favor of the Buffalo Bills. I think that the weather could play a factor this weekend. I kind of went back and forth on this because obviously the Bills have the potential to put up 30 plus. No question
they do
on the Steelers. But combined with the weather factor, you're getting Minka back. I'm hoping that Porter, a good game is coming from him. Hoping the Steelers get just enough pressure. I think that they will have a chance, but I can also see the game getting a little bit out of hand early. Steelers have to fight back, maybe get 2 of their 3 scores in the second half of the game, and that's where it ends, and that's where their season ends. And then the talk becomes about Mike Tomlin and his future, 7 playoff win, and yada yada. And so we'll be sure to break that down, and we're hoping we can at least delay that for one more week here.
Right.
So that's what we have. Shayne and I both have Buffalo taking it over the Steelers this week. We will not get to see TJ Watt in the postseason this year. I hope that we're wrong. Stay tuned. If you guys have your predictions, please drop them for us. We'd like to see where those are, and maybe by this time next week we can look at it. Maybe one of you predicted it correctly here. All right, we go live on this show. All right, we're going to get to one more. Let's get to one more here. All right, do you think Tomlin's stepping down? All right. Do you think Tomlin stepping down talk is because Khan and Weidl are taking away some of the control? I don't know if it's a control issue, honestly, because I just think that Tomlin has so much power. Like I've compared, he's like Emperor Palpatine at this point, where he has so much power that I don't know if they would have the edge to do that without the really say so. So I don't know if it's because of that. I generally think. Not that that would be the wrong decision. I'm just saying I think it's more likely that Tomlin is getting burnt out. Maybe, and I think that seems
more likely. Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't know if there's any truth to taking away some control. Like I think that obviously when you bring in guys like Khan and you have him be in the organization so long and Waddle you bring in, like they're obviously trying to change things up. But I don't think they're trying to tell Tom like, hey, we don't want you to be in the decision-making process. We don't want your input. Like it's been a collaborative effort. And you could tell because there's been some things that they haven't focused on in the past that they had the past 2 years. Building up the offensive line, drafting a tackle for the first time, and again, probably since I was born, I think, or somewhere around there in the first round. Like, there's been
96.
changes, right? Exactly. There's been changes that we've seen that Tom doesn't seem to be not on board with, at least, And so I don't know. It's interesting as far as being given a short list of OCs to choose. I haven't heard that either, but honestly, I think that's the right decision, though. I do think there is certain things that I'd like to take Tom's complete utter control over, just because that generally I just don't think that works out. Rarely does.
Yeah.
So I think that it's mostly him just being burnt out. Though.
No, and I think either way, whether Tomlin's here or not, I think we still do have reason to be optimistic about the front office. Like I like the direction that things are heading in. I like that they're targeting actual valuable money positions.
Yeah.
Sure. So we'll obviously track where they are throughout the scouting trail here coming up. And I'll be interested to see where that goes, if we can pull off another great draft class. But we're going to sign off for today's show. Go Steelers. They're in the playoffs. We've made it this far. Might as well win a playoff game. And maybe, just maybe, if they do, maybe TJ Watt can come back a week earlier than expected, and we can have some fun. And we go live on this show every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Please make sure you come and join us live, ask your questions. We also go live on Tuesdays for the show that Shayne co-host with me. And we're live there as well. Thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks for listening today to the Still Curtain podcast.